city of Savannah, Georgia sits, shrouded in a thick mist of Spanish moss and ancient secrets that cling to the humid air like a second skin. It is a place where the veil between the living and the dead is exceedingly thin, and history refuses to remain buried beneath the cobblestone streets. Walking through the historic district at night feels less like a stroll and more like an intrusion into a realm that belongs to the spirits of the past. The shadows here seem to stretch longer than they should, and the silence is often broken by sounds that have no logical source. In this city of restless souls, one building stands as a towering monument to tragedy and terror. The Marshall House is not merely a hotel, but a holding cell for the energy of thousands who died within its walls. Among the historic structures that line the bustling streets of downtown Savannah, the Marshall House stands as a testament to a bygone era of elegance and profound suffering. Its brick facade has witnessed the rise and fall of fortunes and the bloody tides of war that washed over the South. To the casual observer, it appears as a charming example of 19th century architecture welcoming guests, with the promise of Southern hospitality and comfort. However, beneath the polished floors and behind the restored walls lies a history stained with bodily fluids and the anguish of the dying. Those who are sensitive to the paranormal often claim they can feel the weight of the building pressing down on them before they even step through the front doors. It is a heaviness born of sorrow. The reputation of the Marshall House is well known among ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts across the United States. It is frequently cited as one of the most haunted locations in the country, and for good reason. Guests check in expecting a relaxing vacation, but many leave with stories that chill the blood and haunt their dreams for years to come. The spirits here are not shy, nor are they subtle in their interactions with the living. They are remnants of soldiers with shattered limbs and children taken too soon by ravaging disease. They wander the hallways and occupy the rooms they died in, refusing to acknowledge the passage of time. To enter the Marshall House is to invite the attention of entities that have been waiting in the dark for over a century. The story begins with a woman of remarkable fortitude named Mary Marshall, who arrived in Savannah in the early 19th century. She was a shrewd businesswoman in an era when such a title was rarely afforded to her gender. By the middle of the century, she saw the need for a premier accommodation to serve the growing city and its influx of travelers. Construction began on what would become the Marshall House, and in the year 1851, the doors opened to the public. It was a marvel of its time, boasting modern amenities and a level of luxury that attracted the wealthy and the influential. Mary Marshall poured her ambition and her resources into the hotel, creating a legacy that she hoped would endure for generations. The architecture itself was designed to impress, with distinct Savannah gray brick and ornate ironwork balconies that overlooked the busy thoroughfare of Broughton Street. The hotel quickly became the center of social life in the city, hosting grand balls and important political gatherings. Laughter and music filled the dining halls, and the clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the corridors. For a brief period, the Marshall House was a symbol of prosperity and the high life of the antebellum South. However, this golden age was destined to be short-lived, as the dark clouds of fate were already gathering on the horizon. The walls that once absorbed the sounds of joy would soon be forced to absorb the screams of the agony-stricken. As the population of Savannah swelled, so did the risk of catastrophic disease in the subtropical climate. The city was a major port, and ships from around the world brought not only goods, but also deadly pathogens. Yellow fever was the scourge of the South, a terrifying illness that turned the skin yellow and caused victims to vomit black blood. It struck with little warning and killed with ruthless efficiency, sparing neither the young nor the old. When the epidemics swept through Savannah, the hospitals were quickly overwhelmed and unable to cope with the sheer number of infected citizens. Desperate for space, the city authorities looked to large buildings that could serve as makeshift infirmaries. The Marshall House was one of the primary locations chosen. The transformation from luxury hotel to house of death was abrupt and horrifying. The elegant furniture was pushed aside or removed to make room for rows of cots that were soon filled with the sick and dying. The grand ballroom where couples had once danced the waltz became a triage center where doctors made impossible choices about who to treat and who to leave to die. The air that once smelled of expensive perfume now reeked of sickness and the metallic tang of blood. The temperature in Savannah during the summer months can be stifling, and inside the crowded hotel, the heat was oppressive, intensifying the suffering of the patients. The Marshall House had become a waiting room for the grave. Among the most tragic victims of the yellow fever epidemics were the children. Their small bodies were ill, equipped to fight off the aggressive virus, and they perished in heartbreaking numbers within the walls of the hotel. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, but there was little they could do against the relentless march of the fever. The cries of mothers losing their babies echoed through the halls, creating a psychic imprint that remains palpable to this day. It is said that the energy of a grieving parent is powerful enough to stain a location forever. And the Marshall House absorbed an ocean of such grief. The staff tried to maintain order, but the situation was chaotic and filled with despair. As the weeks turned into months, the death toll continued to rise inside the makeshift hospital. Bodies were carried out the back doors under the cover of darkness to avoid causing panic in the streets. The ground beneath Savannah is sandy and soft, making it easy to dig graves. but hard to keep them stable. The city was running out of space to bury its dead, and the Marshall House was at the epicenter of this morbid logistical nightmare. The guests of the hotel were no longer wealthy travelers, but the specters of death that hovered over every bed. The building itself seemed to groan under the weight of so much loss, as if the very bricks were absorbing the trauma. When the frost finally came and killed the mosquitoes that carried the disease, the epidemic subsided. But the Marshall House was forever changed. It returned to being a hotel, but the atmosphere had shifted. Guests would sometimes complain of a sudden drop in temperature or a feeling of being watched while they slept. The laughter that returned to the dining room seemed hollow compared to the heavy silence that lingered in the upper floors. Mary Marshall continued to run her establishment, but she too must have felt the lingering presence of the tragedy that had unfolded. However, the hotel had only just begun its journey through history, and an even greater horror was approaching. The year 1861 brought the outbreak of the American Civil War, and Savannah found itself in a precarious position. As a key port city, it was a target for the Union blockade, and the economy began to strangle. The Marshall House continued to operate, but the clientele changed from tourists to military officers and desperate families fleeing the conflict. The war drew closer with every passing year, and the sound of distant cannons became a familiar backdrop to daily life. The tension in the city was palpable, and the hotel became a hub of rumors and anxiety. Everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before the war arrived at their doorstep. In late 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman completed his destructive march to the sea and captured Savannah. He presented the city as a Christmas gift to President Abraham Lincoln, sparing it from the burning fate that had befallen Atlanta. However, the occupation brought with it a massive influx of wounded Union soldiers. Once again, the Marshall House was commandeered by the military and converted into a hospital. This time, the patients were men broken by cannon fire, and muskets their bodies torn apart by the brutal machinery of war. The hotel was filled with blue uniforms stained dark red, and the screams of men in agony replaced the polite conversation of guests. The medical practices of the Civil War era were primitive by modern standards, and often did more harm than good. Anesthesia was in short supply, and surgeons were often forced to operate unconscious or semi-conscious men. The primary method of dealing with shattered bones and infected wounds was amputation. The surgeons worked with grueling speed, sawing through bone and flesh in a race against blood loss and shock. The Marshall House became a factory of dismemberment, where young men entered whole and left as cripples, if they left at all. The surgery rooms were scenes of absolute carnage, with blood pooling on the floorboards and soaking into the wood. The winter of 1864 was one of the coldest on record for Savannah, adding another layer of misery to the suffering inside the Marshall house. The soldiers huddled under thin blankets, shivering as their wounds festered. Gangrene was a constant threat, and the smell of rotting flesh permeated the entire building. The surgeons threw the severed limbs into piles, creating a gruesome accumulation of human debris. With the ground frozen and the staff overwhelmed, they needed a quick way to dispose of the amputated arms and legs. They made the practical but horrifying decision to bury the limbs under the floorboards of the hotel. For decades, rumors circulated about what had happened during the Union occupation of the Marshall house. People whispered about the limbs buried beneath the floor, but many dismissed it as a macabre urban legend. The hotel went through various owners and periods of decline, eventually shutting its doors and sitting vacant. The building fell into disrepair, and the secrets it held were locked away in the darkness. It stood as a silent observer on Broughton Street, its windows like dead eyes staring out at the modernizing city. But the spirits inside were not resting. They were merely waiting for the living to return. In the late 1990s, a massive restoration project began to return the Marshall house to its former glory. Workers entered the dilapidated structure, peeling back layers of paint and rotting wood. As they began to tear up the floorboards in the downstairs area, they made a discovery that stopped the project cold. There in the dark crawl space, beneath the main floor, they found bones. Not animal bones, but human bones. It was a chaotic jumble of femurs and ulnas and finger bones, preserved by the dry air and the protection of the building. The urban legend was no longer a myth, it was a terrifying reality. The discovery of the bones sent shockwaves through the community, and forensic experts were brought in to analyze the remains. They confirmed that the bones showed clear signs of surgical amputation, consistent with Civil War-era medical tools. Saw marks were visible on the ends of the bones, proving that these were the discarded limbs of the soldiers who had been treated in the hotel. The workers were spooked, and many felt uneasy continuing the renovation. The disturbance of these remains is believed to have acted as a catalyst, waking up the dormant energy of the house. By unearthing the physical evidence of the trauma, they had unleashed the spiritual residue associated with it. When the Marshall house reopened in 1999 as a luxury boutique hotel, the staff and guests immediately began to experience unexplainable phenomena. It started with small things like lights flickering or doors opening on their own, but soon the activity escalated into full-blown apparitions and physical encounters. The spirits of the Union soldiers seemed to be the most active, confused, and perhaps angry that their resting place had been disturbed. Guests reported seeing men in blue uniforms standing in the hallways or sitting in chairs in their rooms, only to vanish when spoken to. The past was bleeding into the present with undeniable force. One of the most common reports from guests involves the sound of children running down the hallways late at night. The heavy footsteps of boots are also heard pacing back and forth on the hardwood floors, even when the rooms above are unoccupied. The ghosts of the yellow fever victims and the soldiers seem to coexist in the space, creating a cacophony of spectral noise. Housekeepers have reported cleaning a room and locking the door, only to return minutes later to find the bed messed up and the furniture rearranged. It is as if the invisible occupants are trying to assert their claim over the space. The fourth floor of the Marshall House is widely considered to be the most haunted area of the hotel. This was where the operating rooms were located during the Civil War, and the energy there is particularly intense. Guests staying on this floor often report waking up in the middle of the night to see a dark figure standing at the foot of their bed. Some describe the figure as a surgeon wearing a bloodied apron holding a saw. Others see a nurse in period clothing moving silently from room to room, checking on invisible patients. The fear that permeates the fourth floor is primal and overwhelming, forcing some guests to check out in the middle of the night. Room 414 is frequently cited as a hotbed of paranormal activity. Those who stay in this room often report a crushing pressure on their chest while they try to sleep, as if someone is sitting on them. This phenomenon, known as the old hag syndrome, is terrifying and often accompanied by a foul odor. The smell is described as a mixture of rotting flowers and burning flesh, a scent that has no physical source in the room. It appears and disappears instantly, leaving the occupants gasping for fresh air. Many believe this room was a recovery ward where the most critical patients were left to die. Another chilling phenomenon reported at the Marshall House involves the bathrooms. Guests have reported turning off the faucet only to have it turn back on full blast seconds later. Toilets flush on their own, and shower curtains are pulled back by unseen hands. Some have even seen writing appear on the steam-fogged mirrors messages that fade as quickly as they appear. It is a violation of privacy that leaves guests feeling vulnerable and exposed. The entities seem to derive a twisted amusement from terrifying the living in these intimate moments. The water itself seems to act as a conduit for their energy. The lobby of the hotel is not immune to the haunting. The portrait of Mary Marshall hangs prominently in the entrance, and some staff members claim that her eyes follow them as they move across the room. There is a belief that Mary herself still watches over the hotel. She built ensuring that it meets her high standards. While her spirit is considered benevolent, her presence is still unnerving. Doormen have reported seeing a lady in a long Victorian dress descending the main staircase, only to dissolve into mist before reaching the bottom step. She is the eternal hostess, greeting guests from beyond the grave. Perhaps the most disturbing encounters are those involving physical touch. Guests have reported feeling cold hands grabbing their ankles while they sleep, or a sharp pinch on their arms. This is often attributed to the ghost children, who are said to play pranks on the living. Some guests have woken up with unexplained bite marks or bruises that were not there when they went to bed. The playful nature of children becomes something far more sinister when it involves the dead inflicting pain on the living. It is a reminder that these spirits are not merely recordings of the past, but active, conscious entities. The staff of the Marshall House has learned to coexist with the spirits, often greeting them by name or acknowledging their presence to keep the peace. They tell stories of the night shift where the elevators will move between floors without being called, and the kitchen equipment will turn on by itself. There is a mutual respect, but also a boundary that is constantly tested. New employees often quit within their first week, unable to handle the constant feeling of being watched. Those who stay develop a thick skin and a deep respect for the history of the building. One particularly famous story involves a guest who was mocking the ghosts loudly in the bar area. He challenged the spirits to show themselves, claiming it was all a hoax to sell rooms. That night, he was awoken by a loud crash in his bathroom. He found his toiletries swept off the counter, and the glass of the mirror cracked from corner to corner. He left the hotel, immediately leaving his luggage behind. The lesson was clear. The spirits of the Marshall House demand respect, and they will not tolerate mockery. They are trapped in a cycle of trauma, and their patience for skepticism is non-existent. The hallway on the second floor is known for the phantom nurse. She is often seen carrying a tray of medicines or fresh bandages, rushing towards a room that no longer exists. Witnesses describe her as looking exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a uniform stained with fluids. She seems to be stuck in a loop, forever trying to save soldiers who died over a century ago. When guests try to approach her, she looks through them as if they are the ghosts, and she is the only living person in the hall. It is a heartbreaking sight that highlights the tragic loop of the haunting. During the month of October, the activity in the hotel seems to spike. The anniversary of the yellow fever outbreaks and the approach of winter seem to trigger the spirits. The air in the hotel becomes noticeably colder, and the shadows seem deeper. Paranormal investigation teams often book the entire hotel during this time, hoping to capture evidence of the afterlife. They capture electronic voice phenomena of men groaning in pain and children singing nursery rhymes. The evidence collected at the Marshall House is some of the most compelling in the field of paranormal research, proving that something lingers here. Despite the terror it induces, the Marshall House remains a popular destination. There is a morbid curiosity that draws people to places of death and suffering. We want to know what lies on the other side, and the Marshall House offers a glimpse through the keyhole. However, it is a dangerous curiosity. By entering their domain, we are inviting the dead to enter ours. We open ourselves up to attachments and energies that we do not understand. The guests who leave the Marshall House often take a piece of it with them, a lingering shadow that follows them home. The Marshall House stands today, beautifully restored and welcoming. The warm lights of the lobby beckon travelers in from the dark Savannah streets. But as you walk past the reception desk and ascend the grand staircase, remember what lies beneath your feet. Remember the limbs in the soil and the blood in the wood. The hotel is a luxury facade over a mass grave, a beautiful mask hiding a rotting skull. When the lights go out in your room and the silence of the night settles in, listen closely. You might just hear the weeping of a mother or the saw of a surgeon echoing from the darkness. The spirits of the Marshall House are not gone. They are simply waiting. They are the permanent residents, and we are merely passing through their domain. As long as the bricks stand and the history is remembered, they will remain tethered to this place. So if you ever find yourself in Savannah and you decide to stay at the Marshall House, do not be surprised if you feel a cold hand on your shoulder. It is just the past reaching out to touch the present, a chilling reminder that in Savannah, the dead never truly die.